Okay. Good morning, Hebrew Academy. My name is Morris Esquenazi. I'm here to talk to you all a little bit about how to make education, private education, specifically a little bit more affordable. That's what we want to learn about, especially when it comes to the financial planning aspect of it. There's a ton of resources that are out there, both from the school, from the state of Florida, and outside. But what I'm here to do today is to talk to you all about maybe more so the personal financial planning side of it, where you could get a little bit more on top of your finances and have a little bit more control over what's going on in your personal world to make things a little bit easier from a planning standpoint. And I'll take a second first to introduce and tell you a little bit more about myself and my practice. I've been a financial planner since 2011. That's where I graduated from UCF, the Knights. National champions in college football last year. But more importantly, I graduated with a degree in finance, and I started my career as a college intern with my practice at Northwestern Mutual. And when I graduated, I decided to continue that career full-time, so I've been practicing ever since then. And started the internship, learned how to build my practice, and from there, continued to build. And in 2015, I became a certified financial planner. That's when I decided to take the career even more seriously by expanding my knowledge base and learning more, not just about helping clients with insurance and investments, but other aspects of their planning, like budgeting, taxes, retirement, and just becoming an expert in a wide swath of information to be able to help them with every aspect of their financial lives. And that's why I got into this business, and why I'm here today is to help you all a little bit more about, some areas of your financial planning that might not be what we consider to be thinking about when we think of planning. So that's what I first want to talk a little bit about. Most people have this great misconception about what is financial planning. And a lot of times, what people think when they first think of that is they think of multi-million-dollar investment accounts, they think of uber wealthy, they think of those who have a ton of money to save, who are making 6 or 7 figures, and they think that planning is really only for that upper echelon of the financial hierarchy in our society. But the reality is that that's not the case. The reality is that planning is really nothing more than making sure that your intentions equal your outcomes when it comes to what your goals are, whether that's retirement, whether that's budgeting, whether that's education planning, which of course is what we're here to talk about today. And the way that you plan is really not very different from similar to working with a trainer at a gym. You have a certain goal, you want to either lose X amount of pounds, or you want to fit in a certain dress or suit that you have from years ago, or whatever the case is, and you have a lot of clarity on what this goal is, but you know that you need to either eat a certain way or do a certain amount of exercise to reach that goal. And you might be thinking about it in terms of chunks and benchmarks and milestones. And that's the same way that I approach planning, or what planning should be approached for clients across the nation at every age and at every stage of their life. Because as we get older, not only do our circumstances change, but also our goals tend to change. If you're a young family, a lot of things that come in your mind are protecting your family, saving for the future, thinking about education planning. As you get older into your middle age and pre-retirement ages, now we think a little bit more about retirement, making sure that you don't outlive your money and things along those lines. So I want to make sure that we all have a clear understanding on what planning is, because there's a big misunderstanding there, in my experience. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about, now we're going to circle into to the planning aspect, is really at the bedrock of it all, what we have is cash flow. That's the movement of money in and out of our lives. So you know how they say cash is king? Well, in my opinion, cash flow is king when it comes to financial planning, because it's a certain amount of money that comes in, there's a certain amount of money that comes out, and ultimately what planning comes down to is being in control of, or being aware of where that money comes from and where it's going to. Because if you don't have a handle or an understanding on what that is, or where it's going, then what we all too commonly suffer from is wondering, where did our money go? And the thing that I like to share with people all the time is, you got to tell your money where to go. You don't want to worry or wonder so much, where did it go? So that's one of the things that I've found a lot of success recently in talking with my clients, families, and friends to make sure that they're a little bit more in control of their dollars. So the way that we start by doing that is understanding what your budget is. And your budget is not just looking back on, okay, I spent this money on this, I spent this money on that. It's not just looking back, right? Because if we look back and we know how much we did spend, then we're still, that's part one of knowing where our money did go, but it doesn't address, the concern of, okay, where is our money going to go? Where do I want it to go? Or where do I want to prioritize it? The way that budget works at the end of the day is that it's really a symptom of what our priorities are. If you're a young millennial that's going to Starbucks every day, spending $5 on a grande latte with triple pump this or whatever, that's going to add up, and you're prioritizing eating out for coffee over other things like saving for retirement or putting money away for an emergency fund and things like that. So what we want to make sure, what we think about insightfully, is that your budget really is a reflection of what we prioritize and also how we treat the importance of certain things. Okay, so now that we understand that, one of the big things that we can do is, before we even set limits, is talk about understanding what we've spent our money on. So I talked about this before. The first thing that we can always do is understand what are our fixed costs on a monthly basis. So the first thing that we have to do is gather the information, not just what do I want to spend, but what am I spending? What do I need to spend? Because there are certain things that we just can't escape. Like, for example, the price of tuition. It's set, and that's the world that we live in. So what we have to do is work around that to figure out not just what we can afford, but also make sure that we prioritize it and also take advantage fully of all the programs and opportunities available so that you can offset or minimize that. Because at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is that we can't change the pricing on tuition. What we can change is our behavior, our timing, our priorities, and what we spend some of our other dollars on, okay? So let's first think about, we're starting from the top down. We have money that comes in each month or each year. If your income goes up and down, we want to think about things maybe more annually rather than monthly. Because if you have a fixed paycheck, then monthly is a very easy way to go because the same money comes in on a regular basis. That makes life pretty easy. If you know what's coming in each month, budgeting generally should be a little bit easier because there are no surprises, at least from an income standpoint. But if you work for yourself, if you're a business owner, or if your cash flow is just not so regular coming in, if your paycheck is not so regular, if you have bonuses or other things, then what I encourage a lot of times people to think about is income on an annual basis. Because we're looking at an annual cost. You're only paying tuition once a year. You only make an annual income and pay your taxes once a year. So that's a way to normalize things if your income isn't so regular. After we do that, then what we want to look at the next step down is what are our fixed expenses? What do we have to spend to keep the lights on every month, no matter what the case may be? So those might be things like rent, or your mortgage, or your car payments, which I'll get to after because I know that in South Florida, we tend to keep up with the Joneses, so maybe that's another aspect where you might want to think about, okay, maybe the next time that I get a car, if I'm leasing a car, maybe I shouldn't get as fancy of a car, or if you do own a car, maybe you might not want to jump into a new one just yet. You want to hold off and keep those, payment-free situations for a while. But you have your fixed expenses, your home-based expenses that aren't going to fluctuate or change on a regular basis. We're not talking about traveling. We're not talking about going out to eat. We're not talking about the Starbucks. We're not talking about gifts or donations or anything that can fluctuate or change based off of, whether your finances do well or whether it's something that you could really live without to do, technically speaking, okay? So I'm going to use an example. I'm going to use a $10,000 a month income just as an example because everyone likes the number 10. It's very easy, and it's very easy to work with and understand and kind of build down from there. So if we're imagining that a household is earning $10,000 every month like clockwork, okay, what we want to first think about is what are we spending every month no matter what? Mortgage, rent, taxes, insurance, groceries, etc. Let's imagine for a second that if you're earning that income, and we're not talking about tuition for a second, we're just talking about, personal and home expenses for a moment because we're trying to budget in the tuition. Let's say that our fixed expenses are $6,000 per month, or $7,000 per month, maybe even $8,000 per month, because we all know that kosher food is expensive, so we have to, it's a little bit more expensive than regular groceries and other things like that. So we have an $8,000 a month budget, and then in our minds, it's very easy to get caught up and think, okay, well, between the other, $2,000 a month, which is $24,000 per year, it's very easy to get caught up in thinking, well, I'm going to take that vacation, well, I still want to go out to eat, and before you know it, that amount of money can go like that, much more quickly than anyone can imagine. It happens at all income levels. I have clients that make, half that income or less. I have clients that make double, triple, quadruple that amount of income. No matter how much money you're earning, it does not get any harder or any easier to budget, but it is very equal across the playing field that everyone feels like it's very easy to lose track of what we're spending. That's just a universal truth that I found. Unless you've built in the habit, unless you've built in the discipline to be aware of or to be looking onto what your finances are on a regular basis. So one of the things that I'll talk to people about is to set limits, to give yourself an allowance, right? We're talking about tuition, we're talking about education. So naturally, if a child was listening in, or if you're a parent and you give your child an allowance weekly or on a monthly basis, they do some chores, or whatever the case is, maybe you give them an allowance for good behavior or doing mitzvot or whatever it is that you allow them for. That's their allowance to do whatever they want. They can save it, they can spend it, they can let it build up, they can do whatever they want. I want to actually use the same principle of setting allowances for ourselves too, as adults, because the truth is that left to our own devices, when there's money left over, most people are going to find a way to spend it. In the same case is, left to our own devices, if we set limits upon ourselves, we're going to find ways to not spend it, right? It's just the way that human nature is. Sometimes we need fences or perimeters around ourselves to do that. And that may not be the case for everyone that's tuning in or listening in here, but I'm talking a little bit more generally, at least right now, and then we could fine tune, on an individual level what anyone's situation is. And for those that are not here, because this is being broadcast Facebook Live, anyone that has questions in general about this or about anything that I'm talking about, I definitely encourage you to shout out in and ask us some questions. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I don't really like talking for an hour straight. I was at a lecture last night and not here, but it was not as exciting as I thought I wanted it to be. I prefer to things be a little bit more interactive. So one of the ways to alleviate or to fix this challenge that a lot of this behavioral challenge that a lot of people have when it comes to saving is setting up the right kind of structures and setups for them to be better savers. Because, why does a 401k tends to do really well? Because people, it's taken out of your bank account it's taken out of your paycheck, for you automatically. So, because I'm not going to sit there and go into your bank account every week or every month and force you to save. I just can't do that, even for the clients that I work with. It's just not feasible. One of the things that I encourage people to do is to set up multiple bank accounts for different purposes. And in my experience, this has been really what more the secret sauce has been to cultivate discipline, to cultivate savings, to cultivate a habit of having different buckets or different dollars with different purposes. And this is all, of course, assuming that, if you do the math and making X amount of dollars per year, per month, and if you look at what you're spending each month on your fixed expenses, and you know what tuition costs per year, because you can't change that, then you got to budget it in, you got to factor it in, whether you're paying it all up front, which is nice because you get a savings from doing that, forget about those advantages, or if you're paying it on a payment plan, then you got to figure out how that's going to work within your monthly budget as well. So here's the sauce. What I talk to people about is you have one, if you're married, a joint bank account, or if you're not married, a single bank account, where you use it just for operational dollars. This is your fixed needs, the stuff that you need to pay every month. In my little example of someone making, call it 10 grand a month, and his fixed expenses are $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 per month, all that money flows into this one bank account, and only this one bank account is used to pay those expenses. He doesn't use this bank account to pay for going out to eat or taking out his wife or husband on a date. They don't use it for travel, for donations. They don't use it for anything other than keeping the lights on and keeping, food on the table, gas in the tank, and so on and so forth. What they do is they have a separate bank account, separate from your emergency fund, which everyone should have. They have a separate bank account, what I call a fun money account, or what sometimes people will call a flexible spending account. And the idea here is that you give yourself a hard limit each month or each year on how much goes into this account for the purposes of being your allowance, right? This is your perimeter. This is your fence that you create for yourself to say, okay, if I only need, call it $500 per month in order to have a sufficient amount of fun, whether it's going out to eat or taking a trip or whatever the case is, then that money goes in there and you only touch it for those purposes. If you're married, a lot of times what I'll tell a husband and wife together is you have one fund account, you have one account, and you have one account. So, a husband has one, the wife has one. That way there's no commingling, and that way they can enjoy their dollars guilt-free. And think about it this way. If you psychologically trick yourself into saying, okay, I have an extra $500 or $1,000 per month or whatever the number is, just think about how exciting that is to know that this pot of money is just for you to spend however which way you like. And the great news is you don't have to spend it. Just like if you're treating yourself like a child, you can save it up and let it stack to build something bigger and better, like a big international trip, or an even bigger hot ticket item like, I don't know, I like to play guitar, so if I had an extra X amount of dollars building up, I could get something really nice for myself, at the end of the year. But that's my personal situation. Everyone has a different thing that they like. Travel happens to be a very popular item that families like to spend money on. Okay, so the idea is that these different bank accounts have different buckets. And in my personal, because in my business, they don't take taxes out of my paychecks because I'm self-employed. What happens is I actually have 3 different bank accounts at the same bank, right? So I have my operations, I have my savings account for emergencies, and I have a third bank account that every paycheck I put a little bit of money in there, and that's for the purposes of paying taxes. Because if they don't take taxes out of my income or paycheck, I don't want to show up in April having to, raid my savings account or maybe have less money than I expect to in my operational account to pay for my life expenses out of there. So having, those different buckets can really empower you to feel a lot better about where you're raiding your money from, or different dollars having different purposes to them. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on, Facebook Live right now, or anyone here in person?
I just would add something.
Sure.
I heard one recommendation that if you want to really give your parnasa, it's an account that you should give. You should have like a different account just for that. So for all the benefits that you receive, your income, take the 10% and put it in that account. So when you hear about fundraising events or causes,
sure,
it's so much easier to give also if you have that account separate.
Absolutely. And the great thing, that's a great point that you make, and the great thing about that is there's no limit on how many bank accounts that you can have. Certainly you don't want to bank in a bank where they charge you fees or anything like that, because that's wasteful, but it's not an endorsement. I bank with Bank United personally, and there's no fees there. You can bank wherever which way you like. I have 3 bank accounts there. I have certain clients that have 5, 6, 7 different bank accounts just for different purposes, like giving tzedakah, or if they're self-employed, that's usually where that stems from, by having so many different types of accounts. You can even have one for your kids. This is their allowance, or whatever the case may be. But absolutely, that's a very strong point that you bring up. So thank you for that.
Do you recommend having a separate account for tuition, or do you feel that tuition should be worked into the monthly $8,000 budget?
That's a good question. I think that the answer to that really is going to be a little bit more circumstantial, based off of any individual person's financial situation. So for those that are really financially challenged, that might not be the best solution, because there's not really much added to that. But for those that maybe feel like it's a big challenge to come up with a large sum once a year or on a regular basis, because it's a good chunk of money, that might be a better option to do that, especially and remind me, because I'm not, the payment plan, is that all year round, or is that through the school year, that it's 9
You
months?
can do 10 months, you can do twice annually or once annually.
Okay, so based off of that, if you're gonna do it twice a year, or maybe something a little bit more less frequent, it might be a good idea to have that, because then you can have some of those dollars sitting in a savings account where you're getting 1%, 1.5%, or whatever interest that you're getting, and that's gonna offset some of those other expenses that you might have, like if your students are a senior, graduation costs, trip costs, and other things like that. So, not no, but not yes necessarily either. Everything is kind of on a case-by-case basis. If we're talking about, we have a spectrum here of families, right? From what I understand, you have families that are really, there are others who've got to make sure that they take advantage of, like scholarships, making sure that they're not late, making sure that they build a timeline for themselves, and understanding how these timelines work, because, for them, every dollar matters a little bit more. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the financially more than stable family that can afford the tuition, but maybe they're just not as on top of their finances because they make so much money. They're just not being in control of it, and they feel like it's a large expense. But oftentimes what I've come across with families that are even making, $2, $3, $4, $500,000 a year or more, it gets very easy to lose track of what you're spending, especially when you're involved in the Jewish community, whether it's giving tzedakah, summer camp, tuition, trips, a lot of things that, especially in South Florida, that's a big, I don't want to call it a plague, that's a big, it's a little bit more dramatic here, but something that's very challenging is what we call lifestyle inflation. The more income that you earn, the more that your lifestyle tends to go up, and that's really not so healthy financially, especially in South Florida, where it's very easy to get caught up in, what your neighbors are driving, or what kind of house they live in, or what your friends, what kind of lifestyle they live. The truth is that, in my experience, most people, income does not always translate to financial health and success. That's just not the case. There are people that make a great salary, but have nothing to show for it. And I have friends, family of mine that earn, a fraction of that income, but because they're very diligent savers and very diligent with their finances, they're in a much better financial spot, and they have that peace of mind. Ultimately, whether you make a ton of money a year, whether you don't, one thing that uniformly I've seen is that everyone just wants peace of mind. They want to know that they're secure, that they feel like they're going to be okay, that they're on track. What that means to them is individual, but that's something that I've seen in my 7 or 8 years of practicing in this business is across the board. Maybe, when I first started and I worked with some younger clients who are just starting out, and they go, yeah, I want to have $1 million by the time I'm 35, and they're really chasing after big numbers. They haven't had the life experience of starting a family or building a career to really understand that money is not, it's not about the balance or the dollar amount. It's about what it affords for you. It's about the quality of life that you have. And that's across the board what I've seen at every age, at every stage, at every income level, that's ultimately what everyone wants. I feel like I went on a tangent for a moment, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so actually my next note that I wanted to talk a little bit about was more on this end of the spectrum, those that are more financially challenged. I'm not sure how many of you that are out there are fully aware of all the scholarships and opportunities available to you. And there's a few programs, both federally and through the state, that you can take full advantage of that definitely help. There's something called the FTC, the Florida Tax Credit. You can find that information from Step Up for Students.org. There we go, I was just looking at it last night. And it's a needs-based scholarship. So regardless of how academically oriented your child or your student is, if you have the need financially, then you can qualify. The way that they look at it is based off of income and based off of household size. It's not a big difference, but depending on what age or what grade your child is in, then the amount of credit or the amount of scholarship that you get is a little bit larger. So for example, straight from their website, I saw that between kindergarten and 5th grade, the Florida tax credit is $6,519. Between 6th grade and 8th grade, it's $6,815, and between 9th grade and 12th grade, it's $7,111, and that's for 2018. So for 2019, I would imagine that those dollars are going to go up just a little bit because of inflation, but you want to make sure that if you do have that need based off of your income level, and on the website there's a handy book that goes over based off of your household income and how many members are in your household, and it'll tell you roughly where you're going to qualify. You want to take full advantage of that. There's a timeline. There's an application deadline. You got to make sure that you're on top of these things, because if you're not, then you're going to miss the boat. And timing really is everything, not just for that, but also, as I understand here at the academy, there are deadlines also for registration. If you miss those deadlines, there's going to be either late fees or the enrollment credit that you submit for signing the contract that might not count towards your tuition. So you don't want to leave money on the table here, because at least on this end of the spectrum, those dollars do matter a bit more. Okay? One of the other things that you got to remember is that there is a scholarship here through the academy itself, and that has, the academy has its own kind of deadline and timeline for how they assess and how they give out their scholarships. I wasn't able to find out the details of how much, but I would imagine it's on a case-by-case basis. And the way that the scholarship works is that it's first come, first serve. It is needs-based, but it is first come, first serve. So there's only so much money left that the academy has to give, and if that's something that's important to you or that you feel that you qualify for, why wouldn't you be the first one to hop on the train to make sure that you can take advantage of those benefits? It's free money. The best kind of money that's out there is free money. Of course, you got to qualify. It's just like your 401k. If you have one where you work, if an employer is matching, you want to take full advantage. If I'm putting in money for you for your retirement, as $3, you should take full advantage of that. Otherwise, any financial advisor that says otherwise is probably not giving the best advice. So that is that. And then actually I have here the timeline on how the scholarship works through the academy. So I just want to reiterate that so that the audience knows that December 1st, that's when the packets are sent out. Don't forget that on December 15th, that's when the enrollment contracts are coming out. In January, that's when the re-enrollment deadline hits. January 18th is the deadline. That's really important, because after January 18th, there's one major thing that happens. Your enrollment fee that you're charging initially, that you're paying, I should say, initially, after that deadline, it's not going to count towards your tuition. And even though it's either $200 or $500, initially there might be some sticker shock there of having to pay, a lump sum as a fee. But the reality is that if you're going to pay it one way or the other, you might as well have it count. You don't want to have that work against you, because if you do miss the deadline, then it does become just a fee, and that's really not, no one wants that. Okay? So then February 1st is when the scholarship deadline is for the academy. So when these scholarship packets are sent out, which is coming, next week, you want to start thinking about doing all your homework to organize yourself and send it in as soon as possible. Even though the deadline is February, you don't want to wait till the 11th hour, because, like I said, and like I've read, the scholarship money, it is on a first come, first served basis, so you don't want to miss that boat. And then about a week and a half later, that's when students are getting notified that they're accepted in enrollment, which if you're a recurring student shouldn't be an issue. But in April, that's when the scholarships are announced. So just to kind of break it down, really next week we got the packets that are coming out, and then soon after that you have your scholarship packages. But it's not so far, it's only a month and a half out from now that the scholarship is due. So you have 6 or 7 weeks to get on top of it. And from what I've looked over through this scholarship packet, there is a lot of information that's required, which I'm going to get to something in a minute that's a really important point, which is to make sure that you're organized. I'll get to that after. But it is a lot of information, whether it's banking information, account values, insurance amounts, and so on and so forth. It does help to get on top of it as soon as possible, which is challenging with Hanukkah around and the end of the year, people are, maybe taking some vacations. But don't forget, time passes by very quickly. Before you know it, it's middle of December, and before you know it, it's end of December, and then before you know it, it's, New Year's, and then after New Year's, before you know it, it's already almost the scholarship deadline, and that could be a real burden to qualifying or getting the most amount of money that you want to receive from a scholarship standpoint. Remember, the goal here is to take full advantage of everything at your disposal, both within your control and outside through under the academy or through programs, in order to maximize, what your scholarship amount is, minimize, basically what you're able to pay depending on what your financial situation is, so that we can have as much enjoyment and as little stress as possible when it comes to getting involved with the school. That's just the number one thing that I'm seeing a lot of times with families is the number one big stress is, how am I going to educate my kids? So we want to minimize that stress level as much as possible. No one likes talking about budgeting. No one likes doing homework. But the reality of the matter is that once you get the ball rolling and get started with organizing yourself, you're going to feel good about it. It might not be so enjoyable at first, like dieting or going to the gym. The first time that you start, it's a change, it's a shift. If your behavior's not accustomed to it, it might sting a little bit. But if you do it after a few days or a week or whatever the case is, I'm talking about dieting and exercise, not budgeting. It shouldn't take a week to budget. So, after a week or 2 weeks of continuing to do your diet or the budget or the exercise, you get used to it. You get used to the swing of it, and it feels good. The same thing happens with financial security and organization. The hardest part is always taking that first step, having tough conversations with yourself. What do I earn? What am I spending? How do I organize myself? Where's all this information that's out there? It can be a little daunting at first because there is a lot to amass. Our lives are becoming increasingly complex. But a little organization goes a very, very long way, especially since our lives are only becoming more complex with phones, with everything else in our world that makes things a bit more complicated. My parents are, they're a little bit more analog than I am. They always taught me a few really important, valuable things. The first is, always save first. You got to pay yourself first. So when you come with a paycheck, you got to put some money on the side in case, there's a rainy day. But the other thing that's more relevant here is that you have to be organized. You got to have files. You got to have a system, a way to keep your information on hand. Whether it's through phone or whether it's through a file system, whatever way it works for you, but the most important thing is having all your information together. I have some PDFs or some literature that I can send to everyone if they want to, have like an organized kind of like a life book. It has a little bit of everything, a lot of blank kind of information fields where you can list, your bank accounts, your investment accounts, where things are, and I could also send out a budget sheet to anyone that wishes. So I'll be sure to do that if everyone wants. But the idea is to have yourself a copy, whether it's a digital copy or a physical copy of your budget and your information on a regular basis. So let's do that. So make sure that you get yourself organized, especially when it comes to the budget, because life changes each month. Maybe you have a really good month where you had a little bit more income. Maybe you had a month where you spent a little bit more because you had a couple of birthdays or holidays or whatever the case is. You got to review your budget regularly. It's not the sort of thing that you just do once a year when it comes for tuition time, because then you're going to suffer from what I first described, which is, okay, well, either I don't have enough money, or I need to scramble to figure something out, or this is what I did spend in the past. We don't want to be reacting to what happened in the past. We want to be more proactive. So what I strongly recommend and encourage people to do is to look at your budget on a monthly basis, or at least a quarterly basis. So every 3 months or once a month. You don't need to look every day or every week. That's a bit excessive. Unless your expenses are so kind of week to week that you need to, that's perfectly fine. But to know what your expenses are and to review that budget regularly is going to be really, really huge, because that way, not only do you get a better grasp on where your dollars are going, but it helps you feel a little bit more secure and on top of everything that's going on in your world. Even if it's not financially, it's just remembering, oh, I had that birthday, oh, I had this holiday, oh, there was this, oh, there was that, and it forces you to remember and keep track of what's going on in your life. So you're gonna have a little bit more happiness when you go through that. Okay. So, now.
I'm good.
Awesome.
You're
Okay.
35 minutes in.
Really? I'm really fast. Yes.
Question. Some people think that it's going in the trash and just use cash. I don't know, I believe that with cash you don't have that much control. It's harder to also to follow your budget because you don't, I mean, if you lose a receipt, you don't know how much you spend.
Right.
What do you recommend?
You're talking about physical cash, or you're talking about debit cards? Because debit cards that are not credit cards are equally cash, and you could always track that. So, I'll answer both anyway. Credit cards, it's kind of a two-sided coin, because credit cards are not, they're not the worst thing in the world, but they can be, right? So when you use a credit card, if you're using it to pay some expenses and you're gonna pay it off each month, then yeah, that's perfectly fine. I was actually gonna address credit cards in a little bit, but I'm glad that you asked. So credit cards are not the worst things in the world. What'll happen oftentimes is that people lose track of what they're spending. They'll keep a recurring balance on their credit card and they don't end up paying it off. A few things are happening there in that world. Number one, interest is building. So if you spend $3,000, or whatever it is, each month on your credit card and you're only, paying off $2,000 of it, the $1,000 that's left over, that's going to keep growing on interest. Credit cards have some of the highest interest, that are out there. You're talking 15, 18, 20, 25%. Even if it's 20%, that means that you're getting your $1,000 bill that's left over is now $1,200. And if you do the same thing, charge 3, leave 1, now you have $1,200 plus another $1,000, that's $2,200. That's going to get another 20% interest, and that's another $400 plus dollars. It's going to start building and compounding, and it's going to turn into a little bit of like a snowball that turns into an avalanche. That could be that could be problematic, absolutely. So for a friend of mine who, she maxed out her credit cards, and I told her, you got to just stop using them because they're totally maxed out. She's working towards paying them off, but she didn't really have the discipline to run them, but then pay them off each cycle. So I told her, you just got to cut your credit cards. And it was really nerve-wracking for her. But 2 days later, I got a text. It's an image of her, both of her credit cards cut up in little pieces. And I told her, I'm proud of you. It can be really tough to do that. So for someone that has no discipline at all, the credit cards are probably not the best route to go because it's really easy to lose track of what you're spending. Debit cards, it's not so hard to lose track of what you're spending because you get your statements. But the good news is that if you overspend on your debit cards, the worst thing that's going to happen is you get a $30 overdraft fee and you find a way to make it happen, so you're not getting interest on there. But maybe to your answer about using cash, the solution for a lot of people will be what I talked about before, setting those allowances. Maybe that allowance, instead of using a debit card as a dedicated separate account, you take out X amount of dollars per week or per month from the ATM, and that's your weekly allowance or that's your monthly allowance. And that cash you're only spending on that fun money or flexible spending stuff. So I think that might be a good solution for what your question is. Did that answer? Okay. So one of the other things that I want to make sure that people are taking advantage of here, there's a few other things that we got to make sure that we take care of. First of all, you have the MUF program. So for those that can, where they can get gently used uniforms, there's always ways that you can offset some costs. The second program, at least for the academy, that I don't know if everyone's fully aware, is the breakfast program, where you can get either subsidized breakfast. And the way that I understand how the system works, there's like a keypad or code that's input, so there's there's full discretion when it comes to whether you're involved in those programs or not. So I definitely recommend, when I learned about that, I went to a private Jewish day school, and I don't know how my parents did it. 3 kids at a time, it was not easy. Both my parents are in real estate. They work for themselves. They don't have a fixed paycheck. I don't know how they did it, but thank God that they did. You know, it's really, I don't know if the school that I went to had those same programs or not. So I already talked about making sure that we're not late. I already talked about the debt, so you brought up a good question. So just a couple of little key financial things that are really important. Make sure that you have a cash fund in case of emergencies. All too often I see this to be a big issue when it comes to credit card debt that usually gets racked up when people don't have cash on the side in case of emergencies. They either rack up their credit cards, which could really set you backwards, or they're turning to their 401ks or their IRAs and pulling money out there, which generally that's not so advisable because there's either penalties or other fees associated with it. So if you have those options at your disposal, maybe I would say those are better last-ditch efforts than your first place to go to. Other resources that I think parents can really take a lot of value from, other than stepupforstudents.org, which is where you can find all the information that I talked about with the scholarship, there's a third-party resource that I think is great. It's called themint.org, not mint.com. That's a personal finance tool. TheMint.org. It's an organization. It's a general financial resource website for both parents and for kids, teaching financial literacy, getting people more aware of how to take control of their finances. Has nothing to do with investments or insurances or anything like that, but it's just a great way for parents and for their families to teach basic financial literacy and to get them a little bit more involved. And I think that's something I'm grateful for, that my parents taught me financial literacy when I was young. I guess my parents were grooming me for this job. And then make sure when you're talking to your kids, or yourselves even, you gotta have a separation between needs versus wants. You don't need that vacation to Europe if you're having trouble paying for tuition. If your tuition is the number one priority for you, then you'll find a way to make it work. You don't need to go out to lunch every day if you live close to where you work. You could go home or pack a lunch or meal prep. And those are ways that you could save some dollars. Those things add up. So that's generally the few ideas and things I'll talk to people about to make sure that they're saving here. It's not a bad thing to be frugal about where you're spending your dollars. It just takes a little bit more awareness. It's not very different than keeping kosher. You got to make sure that you're aware of what's kosher, what's not kosher. For us, we all grew up, most of us, or some of us grew up in a world where we kept kosher no matter what, so it's part of our identity. Some of us may not have grown up in such a world, and so they had to learn that behavior. I think the same thing applies here in finances. You got to learn how to be a little bit more aware of these little details and nuances. So that's it for the most part. I definitely want to open up the floor if anyone has any further questions or thoughts, anything that they want me to clear up or talk a little bit more about. I'm happy to do so. Yes.
I know a lot of our parents, and myself included, the kids are graduating from high school, and now they're being confronted with possibly having a child in private school, but then also going to college.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts about student loans?
Okay.
And budgets for students and for parents? They don't get overwhelmed, and that whole process can be a little scary. And how to kind of manage that. And then also for our parents on the flip side, for many of our parents who are younger parents who are just fresh out of school themselves, they've got student loans to manage on top of everything else.
Right.
And so how do you offset that?
That's definitely one of the bigger challenges that I've come across recently. More so with students that have parents or families that have student debt. A few things that you got to make sure that you take a look into. Refinancing is always an option. If you do work in a sector work-wise where you have student loan forgiveness, that's always a good option. There are different ways that you can restructure what if you're talking about parents having student loans. If you have student loans as a parent, you want to make sure that you look into different options to pay it back. The default paying option for student loans is what's called a standard repayment plan. That's a 10-year repayment plan. Think of it as like a 10-year mortgage, right? If you're paying off your mortgage in 10 years, the payments would be a lot higher than a 30-year mortgage. Go figure. But there are other options where you could do a 20-year or extended, or what's called a graduating plan, or even what's called an income-based repayment plan, where the government will recalculate how much you should be paying based off of your income on an annual basis, so your payments would be a little bit lower. Those are some options that you have to free up some cash today, to pay for things like tuition today, things like that. If you are a parent and you have students that are entering college, then you got to make sure you take full advantage of FAFSA, the Florida Student Aid, the federal student aid option where you can look into getting some needs-based grants. That's always an option that people tend to overlook to make sure that's taken full advantage of. The other thing is student loans are not the worst things in the world when it comes to college. So maybe if you're a student and you're thinking about entering college this or next year, maybe you want to think about, is it worthwhile for you to go to that private school for undergrad versus public school? Because private school is going to be twice the expense, and the education generally is going to be about the same, at least in the state of Florida, So whether you go to University of Florida, FSU, UCF, or if you go to the University of Miami, for undergraduate, the quality of education is not going to be dramatically different. And there are some UM grads here, there's some public school grads here. For graduate school, where you're going to get your PhD or your master's, or you're going to law, where those specialized areas are going to shape what your career, what your income is, student loans make much more sense to take those on there. So you want to minimize those student loans. Right now, I think the average adult has like a $30,000 balance on their student loans. It's quite a bit. So, did that answer?
What about prepaying college?
Prepaying college, so if you're a new parent and you want to have college taken care of, there's generally two options. You have in Florida, the Florida prepaid, then you have what's called the 529 plan, which is a federal, it's a tax-free investment account that's geared specifically for college. Also, with the tax reform, now you can also use 529 accounts for private day schools too. So, I don't know if those who are out there know, if you have 529 accounts that are open for a year for college, you could use it today to pay for the academy and other private schools. That's information I don't know if any of you are aware of. But the 529, it's an investment account, so the market's going to go up, the market's going to go down. You're taking on some investment risk, but the account's going to grow and fall depending on how the market does. Generally, it gets a little bit safer as you get closer to that age, just like in retirement. You don't want to have all your eggs in the risky bucket the day that you retire. The prepaid's a little bit better in my opinion because you're prepaying it, you're guaranteeing what the cost is, you don't have to take on any risk, and it's already taken care of. There's a few different options. You can pay a 5-year plan, 10-year plan through age 18. You can do all tuition, room and board, 2+2. There's a few different options that are available through the Florida prepaid. So for parents that are thinking about one or the other, generally I'll steer them more towards the Florida prepaid for college planning. But if they have a little bit of extra money, like a big gift or donation from a family member or something, maybe they can chunk that into a 529 account, let that grow and be invested, and that could be used a little bit more flexibly. So, other questions? Great. Well, I'm here if anyone has any questions. My office is in Aventura, but I also have offices in Coral Gables, downtown Miami, and Fort Lauderdale. My name is Morris Esquenazi. I'm a financial advisor, certified financial planner with Northwestern Mutual. For any information that you have, for more information, you can go to my website, morriseskenazi.nm.com, and you can find all my contact information there. Thank you.